Hey, Sunrise family, I hate so much that we can't be together. But I want to take a moment and just keep us thinking this week. We've been in the book of Daniel in a series that we're calling Uncompromised Faith. How do we live in a world today where culture, distractions are consistently pulling us away, trying to get our eyes off of Jesus? How can we, in the face of all that, have an uncompromised faith? Well, to help us do that, we've been looking at the life of Daniel. Daniel was a young Jewish man who was taken into a captivity, went into a land that was not his own, and yet somehow stood up for the right thing. Daniel got it right. Time and time again, Daniel simply got it right. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, when he was put to test, he was going to have to act like all the other Babylonian men his age. He was put in front of him all the king's food and all the king's diet in front of him, that were things that were sacrificed to the king's gods, things that were not to his God. Daniel said no. He looked in the face of what could potentially be death, hardship, difficulties, and he did the right thing. How does Daniel do that? In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, we talked about last week, has a dream. The dream is bothering him. The dream is keeping him up at night. And he just wants to know, what is the meaning of this? So he calls all his magicians and sorcerers and all these wise men together to say, what does this dream mean? And none of them could do that. So since none of them could do it, King Nebuchadnezzar said, I'm just going to kill them all. But Daniel steps in with wisdom. Daniel steps in and says, don't do that. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 24, he says, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I'll interpret his dream for him. How does Daniel have such confidence? How can Daniel, in the midst of the hardship, say, let me step in? Well, look what happens when he does that. Daniel goes before the king in verse 27 of chapter 2 and says, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. See, what Daniel understood was it wasn't about him. Daniel understood that he served something bigger than what he could see on this earth. Daniel understood it was about God. And that relationship and that focus on God propelled Daniel to do what is right, time and time again. Church, there's going to be opportunities all around us to compromise, to give in. How do we stand firm then? We simply remember, who do we serve? We've been talking a lot about John chapter 15, where Jesus was saying, stay with me. I am the vine and you are the branches. Apart from staying with Jesus, abiding with him, we can do nothing. See, this goes back to understanding who we really are. As followers of Jesus Christ, we say often at Sunrise, there's two things about you as a follower of Jesus. You have an identity and you have an activity. Your identity is someone who is fully surrendered to Jesus. You've come to the place where you realize you can't do this on your own. That this life here on earth and this life after death is bigger than anything that you can handle. And so you've become someone who has surrendered this life to Jesus. But when you do that, you also have an activity. There's something about you that changes. Your activity has become somebody who helps other people find and follow Jesus. See, we get these two confused at times. We tend to lean one way or the other. Most Christians kind of lean towards the activity side, the busyness, the do's and the don'ts, the checklist, and just making sure we do everything right in hopes that it's enough. But Jesus calls us to something more. Jesus calls us to have an identity that is in him. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is talking to the disciples early on. And he says to them in Matthew chapter 4, verse 19, he says, come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Now, Jesus says to them, I'm going to give you an activity. Your activity is becoming fisher of men, becoming people who go and tell people about the ways of Jesus. So while there's an activity there, catch what Jesus said. He didn't say, come and follow me and figure out how to be fishers of men. He didn't say, come and follow me and then do enough work and do enough good and then you can become a fisher of men. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus says, come and follow me and I will make you fishers of men. See, Jesus was trying to help the disciples understand their identity, who they were. It wasn't about simply what they did. It was about what Jesus did for them. It's about who Jesus made them to be. Jesus is the one that made them fishers of men. Jesus is the one that their identity was found in. See, Daniel understood that his identity was not simply as a captive. It wasn't simply as a Jewish man. Daniel understood his identity was with God. And it was because of that identity, the activity that Daniel lived out, the faith to be able to stand up against opposition and do what is right, Daniel was able to stand firm and uncompromised in his faith because he knew who he was in God. Church, we live in a time and a culture that our enemy will throw everything at us. We too can stand firm and uncompromised in our faith because of who we are in Christ Jesus. So church, as we go out this week, remember who you are. In the busyness of all the activity, yes, take opportunity to care for other people. Take opportunity to serve and to share your faith. But let it come out of overflow in who you are, a child of God, bought by the price of Jesus' blood. Remember your identity in Christ. We'll see you next week.